I would hold court every weekend, and I would make my mom and my dad look at me perform. I would go get my Patti LaBelle hair, my mom's, I played her wigs, I put her high heels on, I would do my own makeup, I would do all my own costuming and jewelry, and I would just go for it. And somewhere over the rainbow was always my, big finish. So I think from there, I knew that it was in me, and I love music from, as long as I can remember talking. I would have to say I was in high school, and as professional as I can be, I was cast as the lead in West Side Story for musical theater. So I say professional because, we had a full stage, the full, the props and all of that. I didn't get paid. And, usually once you get the money, that's when you classify professional. But for me, that was my first time, like, really, really taking center stage and knowing that the production hinged on my performance, put it that way. You being Maria, you got to bring it every night. And we performed for, I want to say, a week or two. We ran for a while. It was a good, nice run for a high school play. And then I did Ain't Misbehaving at the West Side Library. Not mistaken, Oscar. Oh my gosh, I wish I knew his last name. I should know it. But he was the first one that gave me a shot in his play back at the West Side Library. And I was still in high school at that time, but that was my first professional gig. Yes, singing is definitely the foundation. That's my core. That's where I'm comfortable. The dancing and the acting came later. I just always knew I could sing because I was around music. My mom was a pianist, or is a pianist, and a teacher. And so, I always heard music, was always around it. Didn't really have to necessarily dance or act. That came later. So I know where my core is. My passion is definitely on the music side of things. I always say, my sister always tells me, Sister Vivian, you can dance, you're a dancer, because music's in my body. But I've never been professionally trained. So for me, without the professional training, I'm like, I'm not a dancer. I can't claim that, and the same thing with acting. I feel like I can't claim that, but it's something that I've worked on. And so I've been able to add that kind of to my toolbox of the arts, and I love all of it. Well, I never feel like I've arrived, and I never feel like I'm good enough. So there's always something, pricking me, whether it's on my shoulder, my back, the gut of my stomach, where I'm never content. And that's been a good and a bad thing because I put almost too much pressure on myself at times to where I've worn myself out and haven't really been able to smell those roses or to live in that moment as I did as a 3-year-old. But that drive is also something that has enabled me to see some beautiful things, and so I'm a person, I get restless real fast, and once I've kind of figured something out, I'm ready for the next challenge. And so that's what helps me. It's like, I've never been to Beijing, China before. What do you want me to do? Sing? I can do that. Why not? So that's kind of always been the driving force. Like, my life is always aligned in a way that opportunities present themselves as they should, and then I have to make that decision. I think that's with everybody. You get those doors that open, and you either walk in them or you don't, for whatever reason. And I've kind of always, I may have that hesitation, but usually if I get that feeling, I'm walking in and I'm going for it. So that's kind of the move. That was really the help of my mother. Going to college, I went to Howard University. And when I was deciding really what I wanted to major in, of course, fine arts just seemed like the natural choice. And I've always thought about music, but I wanted to be a journalist. I was always inspired by Oprah Winfrey. And so I knew at an early age I also could speak well, and I was never afraid to get in front of an audience and talk, sing, or do whatever. So when it came time to go to college and decide what I was going to major in, it was like, don't do music. And, my mother, she wasn't telling me, she definitely left the decision up to me, don't get me wrong. But her guidance was, you will always have your voice. That is a gift from God that nobody can take from you. When you go to school, pick a career that can be your fail-safe, so you always have something else, if music ever dries up or those opportunities ever dry up. So in college was kind of that first opening where I made my mind up. I want a degree. I wanted to go to a HBCU. I wanted to go to a historically Black university. I had a very interesting upbringing. My faith is raised as a Baptist, Christian, but I always went to Catholic school, Catholic private school. And I love my education. I thank God for the sacrifices my mom made to send me to private school, because that was not easy. Single mom, raising 2 girls, and paying that tuition was not easy, but that meant a lot to her. And so that was one side of it. Christian, all white school. I'm usually the maybe 5 Blacks at the most, my entire education, from Holy Family preschool up to Bishop Gorman High School. So I wanted a different experience. And it was interesting. I went to Washington, D.C. for a journalism conference. And I was going to actually interview for George Mason University. And you know what? Excuse me, it wasn't journalism. It was actually theater. It was, so there was a couple of things I was doing on that trip. But long story short, went to Washington, D.C. on a school trip. Went to George Mason University, also visited Georgetown. And my cousin's friend who was on that trip with me said, let me take you by Howard University's campus. You got to see it. It was snowed over. But I had been there for a couple of days, and we kept kind of waiting for the weather to get better. It wasn't. He said, well, you know what? We'll just drive around the campus, and just so you can get the sense of it. I said, okay. Couldn't even get out of the car because the weather was so bad. But I don't know what it was. It felt right. And I said, that's where I'm going to school. That's not why I went to Washington, D.C. on that trip. By fluke, a friend said, you need to go to Howard's campus. I go. There's no other choice for me. And from that moment I got back, everything was set on going to Howard. Put the applications in, started getting my letters, wanted to learn about it. And that door flew open for me. And once again, I walked in. So that was kind of like, I had always had the HBCU thing in the back of my mind, but I was getting letters from other universities. I wasn't getting letters from HBCUs. So that's why, I said, look, I got to go on this trip, but Howard, okay. What's interesting about me, I've always been kind of a daredevil. I didn't have a lot of fear. And so from middle school, every year I went to camp. I was in student government in school. So it was a program called TASK. Okay, I was in a program called TASK. And it was like an association of like leadership for kids in student government in private schools. So it was a week camp. And every year I was like wanting to go. I would stay, move away from home, and I never had that fear of leaving because I always knew I could come back home. So my mom pushed me to travel. I went to across the country because that wasn't the first time I went to D.C. when I went for the George Washington interview. I had gone in earlier in high school too for another journalism camp. And so I never really feared that. And when it came time, I got accepted, I never even thought about, I'm going to be away from family. I don't know if that's just something that I inherently have. My family was more scared for me than I was for myself. But I don't get me wrong, I got homesick at times. But once again, I always know I can come home. Mind, body, and spirit. If you're not feeding and giving energy to all of it, then you're going to suffer in some way. I think in some way, balance is almost an illusion. We all say, I want to live a balanced life. We're striving for that, but it's very, very hard to attain. But I think if you give attention to your body, your mind, and your spirit. That's as close to balance as you can ever get. So I've always just kind of put that, at the forefront, and I had, great role models that, my uncle is a fitness person. He's in his, I don't want to tell his age because when he watches this, he'll be mad at me. But he's, up in age, and you would never see that because his entire life he has fed his body, his spirit, and his mind. And we were little kids going to the YMCA with him with our lunch pails, sitting on the side of the court while he played basketball. We were watching sports. I was exposed to bodybuilding at a very early age. So I've always been around activity. I played every single sport because he bought us bats, he bought us gloves, so I ran track, I played tennis, I played volleyball, softball. I mean, it just goes because they said, just find what you love. Do it all until you find what you love. And I played basketball. You probably didn't even know this. I had offers to play junior college. And, so activity has kind of just been my life. And then I said, I told you I went to a private school, so spirituality was always very important. And education, my grandmother was a school teacher for years. So, I was always pushed in every single one of those areas. And so as an adult, that's why it means so much. I would tell little Crystal, keep that fire. Don't allow influences and perceptions and pressure to become your compass. Because when you do that, you lose a sense of yourself. And so I would tell her, if you can keep that innocence, that naivete, of just not quite knowing what's ahead, because the most times when I've been most glorified or gratified in my life is when I didn't know the outcome. I spent so much time, in a lot of my life trying to make it all right, make it perfect, have a backup plan, have a this, that. And you wear yourself out and you realize half the stuff you did, you really didn't want to do that anyway. You just did it because you thought that was the right thing to do. Keep that fire and go with that gut. Go with your gut. Take your moment. And it'll be okay. Everybody might not like you, but somebody will, and that is okay. The journey. Every scar was just important as every victory. And so I don't want for 80-year-old Crystal to regret anything. I just want her to look back, have a legacy of some sort, where you've inspired somebody, and you lived out your truth. And so there's just peace. I'm Crystal Robinson, and that's my chapter and verse.